and Zero. And our track sponsors who have made all the great content you're hearing today possible. Battery 621 and the Public Works. Capital
Guys,
One Cafe,
I don't actually introduce Brad here.
Friday Health, Quizlet, Exactly,
No,
Zayo,
there's no
and
introduction
Zest.
of Brad.
Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement this week. Thank you to Wix, Kenzen, MAPR Agency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Thank you for your support at Denver Startup Week. You help make all of this possible.
At Zayo, our fiber fuels global innovation. Everything we do, everything we can imagine. Never in history has innovation happened at such a rapid pace. And all of it depends on bandwidth connectivity. Millions of miles of Zayo's fiber span the globe, traveling unique routes, providing dense metro footprints, offering next-generation solutions. We didn't just see the future of fiber, we built it. We delivered it. Every millisecond, our fiber is fueling crucial operations, breakthroughs, and innovations for the world's most impactful companies. Companies that are disrupting the status quo, igniting imaginations, revolutionizing industries, and creating brand new ones. Our customers are advancing wireless communication, transforming healthcare, changing education, revolutionizing transportation, redefining banking, powering retail, and upping the game in esports. These innovators rely on Zayo's fast, secure fiber networks to connect their offices, factories, data centers, clouds, exchanges, venues, and more, ultimately fueling innovation and transforming lives. And behind those fiber connections, Zayo is all about human connections. We take ownership in all we do. Our employees take the initiative to deliver trusted solutions to every customer and make their experience effortless. We are energetic and entrepreneurial, a partner to rely on. We are Zayo. We are working with our customers on what comes next, constantly anticipating what can be. We are fueling global innovation that is changing the world.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Tammy Dorr, President and CEO of the Downtown Denver Partnership and co-founder of Denver Startup Week. Thank you for joining us for our first ever virtual Denver Startup Week. We are so close to hitting the 10,000 mark of participants, so make sure that you tell your friends and family to sign up to wrap up our 5th day of Denver Startup Week. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that we are more powerful when we come together as a community to share ideas and help make each other better and more successful. And here we are, virtually showing the world what Denver is made of. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, sexual orientation, and the combination of any of those. There is something for everyone at Denver Startup Week. We have a shared passion for entrepreneurship. That's what binds us together. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining.
It's my honor to kick off between Brad Feld and Dave Morin. Brad is a key leader in the Colorado entrepreneurial ecosystem, founder of Techstars, an author, and a great advocate for mental health. And many of you may know he's been a significant leader as we look across the state how we navigate this COVID environment. Dave is a co-founder and executive chairman of Sunrise. The mission is to cure depression, reduce suffering, and understand the brain, focused on bringing together science, technology, medicine, spirituality, philosophy, and design to revolutionize how humanity experiences all forms of depression. Previously, he was founder and partner of Slow Ventures, a leading Silicon Valley venture capital firm that champions long-term thinking and innovation. Dave and Brad have shared passion for advocating for mental health. Together, they funded a film on Olympic athletes and mental health called The Weight of Gold, which recently premiered on HBO. A big thank you to both of you for joining us for Denver Startup Week. Now, I'll turn it over to Brad.
Thanks, Tammy. And hey, Dave.
And unmute yourself. That'd be great.
I can hear you now. The modern greeting. I can hear you now.
It wouldn't be Zoom if there wasn't a mistake at the beginning.
Yeah, right. Well, hi. For everybody out there, Dave and I are going to just have a conversation for the next 30 to 45 minutes around mental health and entrepreneurship, and we'll see where we go with it. Dave and I have known each other for a very long time. In the very first Techstars class in 2007, Dave was one of the mentors and came to Boulder and spent time with us. I spent some time with Dave when he was at Facebook, really as I describe you, I don't know if this is the appropriate description, but I describe him as the architect of Facebook Connect, which ended up turning into the whole Facebook API ecosystem. And we've just been, from a distance, good friends. Every now and then our paths cross, and it's always a really emotionally intimate moment for me, at least, to be in the same place with Dave. So it's a great honor to spend a little time. Let me kick this off. I
certainly feel the same way.
Good. It's good that you. It's good that you do. Let me start with framing for an entrepreneurial context, the startup communities context, which I imagine most people know that I talk about. And what I want to do is sort of very, very quickly go into some of the things you've done, Dave, because I think they're really profound over the last 5 years or so around destigmatizing mental health, especially around a few of the things that I've been involved in with you too, so I can add into that a little bit. But the framing is, at the end of March, I think it was March 31st, I wrote a blog post called The Three Crises. And I had just gotten very immersed starting the second week of March in the COVID crisis in Colorado, doing stuff on both the health and economic side, on the private sector side, but supporting state government. I think many people know Jared Polis was a co-founder of Techstars and a longtime friend. And if Jared calls or texts and says help, it's like, what do you want? Happy to help anyway. And it was very apparent to me within 2 weeks that we had three crises, not one crisis. That was the COVID crisis. We had a health crisis, which was the pandemic, that was incredibly fast moving, very hard to process, extremely difficult to understand, and full of endless second order effects that some of them were a result of the virus, some of them were the result of bad decisions, and some were just the result of the chaos that was the function of lack of leadership in lots of places around the world. That generated an economic crisis. And for those of you that remember the second half of March, it was a terrifying couple of weeks from an economic perspective, which has continued, notwithstanding the fact that there's this massive disconnect between, for example, the stock market and our, for example, unemployment numbers, or the dynamics of small business, which are under incredible distress in contrast to some very, very large companies that are doing extraordinarily well in this moment. So this economic crisis also has this incredible inequity around it. And from my point of view, at the end of March, this was all going to generate a mental health crisis. I didn't believe that we were meant as human beings to stay in our houses 24 hours a day, although I like to. I'm perfectly happy to exist behind my computer screen. But most, many people are not. The incredible economic stress, the incredible health stress, separation from family, inability to have natural routine, like just go down the list. And at the end of March, I think people sort of heard the mental health crisis thing when I said it, but it wasn't really like, yeah, this is going to be a thing. And part of it for me, and the reason I was so clear that it was going to unfold this way was I didn't think that there was any quick solve to any of this. I felt like this was something we're going to be dealing with for a long time. And I was unwilling when people would try to press, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. I was just unwilling to put a time frame around it. And I still am unwilling to put a time frame around it. I think we will be dealing with this for a long time. And I think it is generating structural changes in society as a whole. So I just wanted to start with that as a framing for then going deep on mental health, because in different ways, and sometimes together, both Dave and I have been very involved in trying to destigmatize issues surrounding and the stigma around mental health. So I'm going to start with a very personal question, which is, Dave, why? Why is this important to you?
Well, when I sold my last company, Path, I went through a difficult process. I'd spent 5 years building a new social network, which was trying to create a more healthy environment for social networking online. And I left Facebook in 2010 and started Path. And the whole mission behind Path was to give people more intimate, more emotionally safe social networking experience. We limited the number of people you could connect to 150 because that's the maximum limit that neuroscience says the human brain can maintain in terms of healthy, stable human relationships. And it was a difficult, I think we made a really beautiful, very high quality social networking experience, but we were unable to monetize it in a time period that was fast enough in order to keep the company going. And so I had to sell the company in 2015. And this was a profoundly difficult experience. Felt that it was an important mission. To some extent, felt like a failure as an entrepreneur. And when you go through one of those experiences, we were able to sell the company. We were able to return some money back to investors, but not all of it. And, when you go through that experience, it's very difficult. It can be profoundly disorienting, deeply depressing. I went through a really quite bad depression after that period. And the other thing I'll say about it is towards the end of that experience, I had a thing happen where I made a mistake, or I wouldn't even categorize it as a mistake, but it was an interview that I did in a magazine. And it was silly. It was about something that was, they asked me what apps were on my phone. And I answered the question with my PR rep and didn't think much about it. And when the article went out, and it's interesting to talk about now in the context of 2020, actually, because what happened was it went viral and it became a meme, and I became a meme. And I spent the better part of a couple of years being afraid to open my Twitter account because people were saying things to me like, you should die, you should never do entrepreneurship again. You're the worst thing that ever happened to Silicon Valley. And you should go back to Colorado or go back to Montana, wherever you came from. And that was a pretty hard thing to experience. I mean, even talking about it now is difficult. And all of that sort of culminated in a moment where I was walking out of my office one night and, a bus was going by on the street. And I looked at the bus and the thought went off in my head, why I could just jump in front of this bus right now. And that was a really profound turning point for me in entrepreneurship, where I realized that the way that I'd been living, the way I understood what entrepreneurship was and how to do this thing wasn't healthy. I didn't know why. I just knew it didn't feel right. And then, I went through the process of selling my company, and like I said, it was very difficult. And on the other side of it, I considered never working on entrepreneurship ever again. Like, you go through an experience like that, it can feel like, why would I ever do this? I don't ever want to get back to that kind of a moment. And so I spent a lot of time searching and thinking about what I wanted to do. I took about 6 or 9 months off. And towards the end of it, I had this realization that, I grew up in a small town in Montana. I went to Boulder for college. I spent a lot of time in Denver. And I somehow ended up out here and was lucky enough to get one of the greatest educations anybody could ever get. It's an education that you can't buy from school. It's very lucky. And I started to think about what problem might I want to make, the sort of focus of my life's mission going forward. And, through my own experience, which I just described, and then the experience of watching my father actually struggle with depression for most of his life. And, for most of my known life, my father's struggled. And I started asking this question: why has society so failed at addressing this problem that there have been no new solutions, no new antidepressants, no new, no real forms of treating this or helping people through this suffering in 30, 40, 50 years. And I had seen it empirically. I'd watched my dad suffer. I'd watched, I've been through it myself entrepreneurially. And I'd watched a lot of my friends and a lot of people that I've either invested in or worked with. They've gone through it, but they weren't talking about it. And there certainly weren't new solutions, and people were just suffering. And so I pretty quickly towards the end of that year decided to dedicate, my life's mission and the rest of using my entrepreneurial skill set and my venture capital skill set to try to reduce the suffering around this and bring forth, better options for treatment, be they may, from the East or the West, from science or spirituality or, ancient practices, new things, but also just try to address the stigma and raise awareness and try to just advocate for that people are not alone. And when I think, Brad, I guess I have to reflect back a little bit. I've just talked about myself for a little while, but I mean, I remember vividly when you came to Boulder. I think it was right around when I was graduating from college in Boulder, and you started writing about startups and entrepreneurship and venture capital, and it was something I was always fascinated with. And as time went on, you became really the only voice, and for a long time, you were the sole voice, maybe in the entire ecosystem, willing to talk about it, to be a shining light, really. And I know I looked up to you, and you gave me great strength and just really, I think a beacon of light is the right way to say it. When there was no one else talking about it, yet I would look around, even in the Facebook days, and there were just people all around that were suffering, and you were one of the only people talking about it. And so, I sort of viewed my role in this as just trying to, I think I reached out to you very early on when I was thinking about starting to talk about this, and it was terrifying. And, I thought, wow, maybe I'll never be able to work in this ecosystem again. And if I start trying to advocate for this, but to me, I just felt that it was an injustice that nothing had been done and that people weren't talking about it, and yet it was all around. And I guess the thing that I've learned now, I guess 5 years of working on this, is that if you're not suffering from it, the person you're talking to is supporting somebody suffering from it or its, many its. And it's everywhere. And I think that, Brad, you really put a fine point on it, that this year it's come to a head in a way that I don't think any of us ever imagined. I certainly, the last few years has been really quite amazing, watching the stigma change very dramatically, very rapidly. You've got a lot of conversations about it. You've got venture capital firms that are making it part of their charter. You've got like a lot of great things happening in our ecosystem, but in the global sort of macro context, I think we sit on a very precarious moment. where we've got, you know, a very clear pandemic health crisis. Whether you believe it's a climate crisis or not, I just lived through one of the scariest things that I've ever seen in terms of, you know, and having grown up in fire country, what just happened in California is one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced in my entire life. Like, I've never seen anything like it. And then on top of that, as if those two things weren't hard enough, you know, there's no way that this isn't impacting mental health on a scale that's probably unprecedented in human history. I mean, this is one of the first times, not only we were all just stuck in our houses, but every religion in the entire world stopped its practices. Nobody was going to church. Nobody was going anywhere, you know? So like every ritual, every practice, every way people deal with stress and suffering and anxieties and all these things, they all stopped. And, you know, and then you layer on top of it all this other stuff. And so we sit at a very interesting moment when it comes to this topic, I think. It's both wonderful that we're having these conversations and that it's a big part of culture now. But I think that really, to Brad, your point, the obvious things that are happening with health and the economy are easy to point out, but I think that this thing's still just, you know, it's happening, but it's simmering, and it's probably going to get worse, especially as winter comes. You know, I just keep thinking of the Game of Thrones line, like winter is coming, and it's like very precarious. And so anyway, that's a long answer to your question, but there's a lot to unpack in there, you know, a lot of work that's been done over the last several years, but, you know, that's the thrust of why I believe in this.
Awesome start. Well, let's talk about a couple of the different things that emerged from the work that you've been doing over the last 5 years. So,
yeah.
You know, I can think of a couple, but you know, one that is I think powerful that's led to your company was some of the UCLA stuff, and sort of maybe unroll that for a few minutes, because I think that's something that's really broad-based also from an institutional perspective versus very narrow gauged from a personal perspective.
Yeah, totally. You know, one of the things that happened very early on was I feel really grateful and lucky that I've had some access, or, you know, through my life experience of places I've worked, in particular Facebook, and the work that I did there, which you referenced earlier. You know, I have the ability to open a lot of doors and make calls and open other doors. And so one of the things I did very early on was just started going around and meeting with people in different neuroscience departments and different academic, you know, research institutions. And I went around, you know, Harvard's and the Yale's and the Johns Hopkins and, you know, Columbia and all of the top, you know, research institutions, and really tried to find who was working on this and were they getting the resources that they needed. And I very quickly learned that they weren't. You know, you go into most academic environments and research universities, and 80% or more of the dollars are going towards cancer and various different types of cancers, diabetes. You know, and these are huge problems, don't get me wrong. But you know, the offset there is just pretty extraordinary. Most doors you walk through, and I walk into these neuroscience departments and they kind of look at me funny, like, are you real? Like, you know, they always say nobody from there has ever been here. And I'm like, where is there exactly? You know, and they're like, well, the technology world and the Silicon Valley. And so very quickly I learned this. And so I just kept hunting till I found, the right university, and the right one turned out to be the UCLA. And down at UCLA, the chancellor and a couple of, you know, really wonderful man there in the neuroscience department named Dr. Nelson Freimer, he started what they call the Depression Grand Challenge. And they effectively declared that all of the resources, the mission of the university in all of its departments, not just science and neuroscience and your typical, medical research departments, but the engineering school and the business school would dedicate their mission for several years to the ending of the suffering, finding cures for depression specifically. And, they set a really ambitious goal that they would want to see 50% improvement in this suffering. And the numbers are just staggering when you really start to look at it. It's like 1 billion people in the world. It's 1 in 4 women, 1 in 4 men, 1 in 6 women. I mean, no new antidepressants in 35 years. The numbers are crazy. And so to have a major research university, not just any research university, but the University of California at LA, which has the University of California system behind it, it's a big deal. And so I actually got very involved, joined the advisory board of that Grand Challenge, and ended up really getting involved with designing and helping to build out what is now one of the largest studies of mental health going on in the world, and with a very specific focus. One of the biggest problems in mental health is that there's no objective diagnostic. It's the only part of the medical establishment where the doctor can give you a treatment using no biological marker of any kind. There's no, gadget you can use or number you can look at to make the diagnosis. And then there's no number or gadget or anything that you can use to track the treatment. It's all subjective. And so one of the things that became very clear very early on to me was that understanding the genetics, is it genetic at all? Is it experiential entirely? These are questions we still don't have answers to. And so the primary goal of the Depression Grand Challenge at UCLA now has become, can we do a 100,000 person study over 10 years with 10,000 people per year using the most advanced genetics technology, full genetic sequencings, full biomarker tracking. UCLA put together an entire hospital just for this purpose, because if you're going to do 10,000 people per year, you can't just do it willy-nilly. You need to provide full treatment, full service, psychiatric and mental health care. And, you have to take this on in a real way. And so doing that, but along with the genetics, if we're going to ask questions like, can you find the genetic basis for a, let's say major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder or, ADD or OCD, these are words and names in a book that were made based on symptoms, not based on biology. And so if you're going to actually try to find, is there a genetic basis for one of these? You can't just look at genetics, because genetics are just, it's like the architecture of what then becomes your body and your mind. And the other input is your experience, your life, right? Like how you experience the world, what happens, et cetera. And so how do you get that behavioral experiential layer on top of that? And initially we started out looking at, hey, engineering department, can you create a wristband or some way for us to track mood, provide other experiential behavioral data? And so the engineering department actually using the iPhone and some, prototype wristbands and a galvanic skin sensor and looking at the amount of water in your dermis, you can actually get a pretty good reading on stress. But, UCLA engineering department isn't great at ergonomics and design. And so it was clunky and, et cetera. And then we also got the computer science department to look at, could we use machine learning and, the most advanced database technology to capture all of this data and then compare it to the genetics and start looking for patterns in these types of things. And so that's how it started initially. And to close up the story, I'll say along the way, I made a call over to Apple, my former one of my alma maters, and Tim Cook and the team over there, and asked if we could have some conversations about potentially partnering UCLA with Apple, similar to what they did with Stanford in the HEART study. And over 2 years' time, negotiated that, got it figured out, and I'm happy to report that I guess it's about a month ago or so now, we announced that UCLA and Apple are now partnered on doing, Apple's now providing the Apple Watch, the iPhone, as well as their bedded sleep device and special access to APIs. And, is really the technology partner for creating data sets that can go along with the genetic data sets in a very meaningful way. Apple really is doing the best work with sensors on the planet. Nobody else even comes close. And so it's a really big deal. And, we're starting out small as things go, a few thousand, but Apple will, become part of the entire study over time. And then, we'll see where it goes from there. And if it works out well, technology that could improve mental health might end up on 1 billion iPhones someday. That's to me, that's the best possible outcome.
Let's talk about stigma for a few minutes, because I think that's a powerful part of the dynamic of this. When you consider, even in your introduction, like as you struggled with your own depressive episode, sort of the emotional feeling of talking about it and how people would respond to it, investors would respond to it. I remember a dinner we were at 3 years ago, something like that, hosted by, well-known, very successful entrepreneur with, 20 people, almost all of them very well-known, very successful. And the conversation veered to this topic. I can't remember what stimulated it in that direction, but it kind of veered to this topic. And there was, there were sort of two different conversations going on at the same time from where I sat. One conversation was about depression and how depression affects entrepreneurs, and and there was a lot of head nodding, and there was some stories and some agreement. But then there was another conversation which they were interwoven. It wasn't separate, like two different conversations, but they were happening simultaneously. The other conversation was some people at the table saying, and you have to suppress this, you can't talk about it, you must hide it. The investors will be evil, nobody will respect you, yeah, you want to crawl into a hole, but you must ... And then there was another set of people who were like, nah, that's bullshit. Let me explain why. Like, we need to actually get rid of that kind of thinking by modeling, That was kind of my recollection of the two conversations. I'd love your interpretation of it, because we were sitting at opposite ends of the table, and I remember.
Yeah, it was interesting. We were on two different ends. Yeah,
we're kind of looking.
We were actually at both heads, and this thing went on.
That's right. And so what was what did you take away from that? And knowing that was 3 years ago, what feels like it shifted in the last 3 years from that moment?
Yeah, I remember a couple of things. The entrepreneur who was hosting the dinner, I would say has been extremely successful, and but was very successful in, call it, earlier internet eras, right? And I mean, we're talking a decade ago, right, when things were very different, right? And though that person stays involved in the ecosystem, they're kind of distant now, I think, from the culture. And so there was a statement, I think, that happened where it was like, you should immediately, that person was speaking as though they were a board member, right? And said that if I were a board member, I think actually, now that I'm remembering, the question that was asked, and this was a later on question, was, well, if you're a board member or a venture capitalist on the board of a company where the founder comes and says, I'm dealing with, depression or some form of mental health, what do you do? And there was a real split. But coming from a couple of folks, there was this sense that you should immediately fire them. And I remember looking at you with like absolute shock, and also thinking like, wow, I get that perspective, but that also feels like a different era. But there's that's probably a real opinion that's out there. And okay. And, you know, I remember another person at the table who runs one of the best, you know, seed venture funds in the world, saying, you know, I used to agree with you somewhat, but my opinion on this has changed for a very specific reason. And this person collects a lot of data. They're one of the best, I think, at collecting huge amounts of data about everything going on in the ecosystem and every one of their investments and what happens. And he said, you know, I used to think there was this thing that happened with founders where you would hear about something, you know, a company kind of drifting and maybe it's not executing well, and you'd know they were in maybe a M&A process, or, you know, the company was sort of finding an outcome that was not optimal. And I'd see founders just go dark. And I used to get very angry about this. And I would think that the founder was irresponsible and not communicating well. And, you know, and then I wouldn't hear from them. And sometimes the company would get sold and I'd never hear from them again. And that's what I thought. That was my frame. And then this person said, but then I started asking questions and trying to figure out what was going on in this period. And the more questions that I asked, the more I realized the reason that they were going silent was because they were deeply in depression. They were suicidal. They were scared. You know, they were doing their best, but it was not what I thought it was, and not what I thought it was for maybe a decade. And I thought that person's perspective was very interesting, and I've always respected that person a lot. And so, you know, I thought that was very aware and interesting. And yeah, I think there was a lot of other folks. You know, I think there was a woman at the table who runs a very, you know, another wonderful fund, and was talking about women's issues and how it's like doubly bad for women, right? It's like you're already a woman and dealing with extreme bias from this community, and then throw on top of that, you know, dealing with mental health issues. It's just like something you literally can't even bring up in your board meeting, you know, even remotely. And, you know, that person wanted to fight for this, but felt it was too early. And so, you know, I think that's where we were. I don't know if that's a fair representation.
I think that's great. Like I remember the comment you made, the moment where the person said, you know, if I were a board member or investor, I would immediately fire the person. There were a few of us that looked at each other, and I would say the looks on our face were horror, right?
Yeah, it was like one of those things like, horror, I'm not sitting at this table ever again kind of look.
I'm out. Like, no, I'm not part of this guy. But then we stayed in it, and you know, like I remember my part of that was arguing the opposite pretty aggressively for a period of time, and not trying to win an argument, but trying to change the conversation to say, you know, and then the comment you made came from that. So I think that was a good representation, but it's powerful. Like when you think about the 20 or some odd people at the table, even in that moment, let's say half of them were comfortable engaging with this, and the other half were very much observing.
Oh yeah.
You know, the discomfort to engage with the conversation, even to express the, I don't really know what I think opinion, which just goes back to this notion of stigma and our inability of the species to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's funny, in that time period, there were many dinners or small conferences. I didn't speak at many large conferences about this, but there were many of those types of situations. And one thing I noticed was that it is exactly what you just said, the amount of energy that was sort of sucked out of the room and how much energy it took to be the one advocating for it. You know, I dramatically changed my workout routine that year, because I realized that in order to advocate for this, I had to actually generate more energy personally in order to go into these conversations and be the one to hold the kind of difficult heaviness that happens when 20 people start talking about this and half the table just kind of, they don't exit, but it's, I don't want to talk about this. And the question you asked earlier is like, where are we now? And I think I said this a little bit earlier, but I'm struck at how much this has shifted in the last few years. I don't think I ever imagined how fast those conversations would shift. It's like, I don't think I'm suggesting that we're done here, but I go to more tables now where people are actively talking about it. And I almost feel like I'm like observing now, and trying to, interject maybe, I think there's a lot, the coolest thing going on now is that people are talking about it. People frequently misunderstand a lot of components of it. And so I can help maybe, guide the thinking, or consider this thing over here, or have you heard of this? And I think that that's really powerful. And the other thing that's very interesting is the amount that it's just become normal to talk about it. Like there's so many, I mean, I'm sort of struck by, there's like WhatsApp threads and things full of venture capitalists that are like trying to figure out, almost similar to what's going on with Black Lives Matters and the women's rights movement and civil rights. There's like a lot of these sort of equality, diversity, inclusion related topics. And this has become one. And that seems really positive. And people maybe aren't totally doing it. I don't want to say the right is the right word, but at least the conversation's happening and there's people that are, trying. And that seems completely different than even 3 years ago. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Strongly. I think the shift in the last 3 years, from my perspective, there is still, huge pockets of stigma in many different ways, especially because of certain types of leadership styles and how that's modeled. Yeah. Within the entrepreneurial ecosystem broadly writ, I think there's a much healthier conversation about it. There's a lot of acknowledgement by multiple leaders. It's no longer, on one person or three people's shoulders that sort of say, look, I've been successful, but, and it's not really a but anymore. It's this being human's hard. And, if anybody as a human being says, yeah, everything's awesome all the time, I mean, they're just full of shit. And the depths of some of the struggles, regardless of the type of mental health issue, whether it's depression, anxiety, mania, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, these are real things. And interestingly, one of the things that's been more clear to me as a person, as a leader, and involved in this conversation, is the segmentation between people who are struggling with these issues themselves and are acknowledge that. And when in a team environment, they acknowledge their struggle, and instead of having whatever the self-hurt behavior or the self-destructive behavior or the hurtful behavior to others, because a lot of the issues, the instantiation of the behavior is not, the way you feel better is to hurt others. That makes teams less effective, makes the environments less emotionally safe. More and more people are acknowledging their own issues and then working on it, whether it's therapy or coaching or something else. And it's becoming more clear when people are in the environments that are high pressure entrepreneurial environments, when they're not working on the issues, and how that behavior instantiates and is no longer just sort of accepted in a hand wavy, okay, well, that's just the way that person is kind of way. So I've seen a big shift with that.
I would agree with that. I think I call it neurotypes, brain types, I think different eras have had different language and ways of going about this, and they sort of reflect the technology of the day. And here we are in the internet. iPhone, AirPod era. And, we used to call like personality tests like Myers-Briggs, and, you'd sort of try to figure out like, what is the person across from me and how can and I think what's starting to happen, and this is just definitely true in younger generations, and I feel like millennials are sort of a bridge generation. Younger than millennials, it's like trading cards. You're just talking about it, and I think that's really cool. But I've started to use this. It's a tool that I don't know. I came upon it. I can't remember who. Somebody else thought of this, but I use it now, which is I just really think it's important to explain your user's manual to somebody. Like I call it the user's manual. So it's like if I'm working with a new team or a new founder or a new partnership, it's like, look, this is my neurotype. Here are the things that are probably going to piss you off. Here are my superpowers, right? And this is what I am aware of. There's probably other things, but to the extent you can explain your user's manual, I think that that's one of the great things that the internet has done for all of us, which is that, there are bad things too, and we could get into that, but we all now, I think, have a much better understanding of that we're all different in a lot of different ways, and the world isn't one size fits all, and it never was. It was kind of a lie that it was. And, we did a pretty good job for a while of building factories, like schools that produced people that worked in factories. And we kind of had, and then we had media that was a factory. So there's all this like, let's build people to work in factories that work in factories and then read media that's made by a factory. And so it sort of felt like, the world was one thing. And I think we're now in a place where we understand that's not true. And we're going through that politically and socially in a lot of ways. But I think the positive of this is that you can actually just use that as like part of your daily life. And you can look across the table at somebody and just be like, what's your user's manual? Like, what do you know about your neurotype? What's been hard for you? What's been easy? How's that going to play into how we work together? I do this now with teams that I work with. It's like, here's what's I'm going to be late a lot. I'm going to forget things. I have very poor rote memory, but then I have these superpowers, right? And I think that that's the case. You look at any study of entrepreneurship and you see, massive, it's like 8x more bipolar, 6x more ADD, 3x more depression, right? Like, all these things. And so you can look at this as disorders, or you can look at it as a unique set of traits which need to be taken care of. Just like, if you were a LeBron James or you were the top basketball player, you're freakishly tall usually, right? Like it's like you can look at the data in the NBA. If you're like under 6'10", or something like that, or 6'6", it's like the likelihood that you'll ever play in the NBA is basically zero, right? And so you could say, well, that guy's weird, or you can say he has a bunch of unique traits that make him able to be one of the best basketball players in the world. And I think that that's how venture capital entrepreneurship is. It's full of people who uniquely are gifted at taking risks, developing innovation, creating new things in the world. And we have in the past treated this as, you know what? Awesome, LeBron, now you're on the team. Here is a venture capital check, which is effectively a ticket to $100 million of raising venture capital, right? Which kind of looks like an athlete contract. And then we say to them, you know what the best thing for you to be to take care of your health would be? Eat ramen, don't sleep, don't have friends, live in a one room, and don't take care of your health. And please give me world-changing innovation on the scale of Steve Jobs. And it's crazy, right? Like, we should treat entrepreneurs, venture capitalists should treat themselves like athletes and scientists and musicians treat themselves, right? It's sort of like we're just a young ecosystem that, music labels figured this out a long time ago. Athletic teams figured this out a long time ago. And we just haven't totally ingested this yet, I think. And because it's like the traits are inside the mind, right? They're like inside, not outside. And so it's just easier when they're outside than it is when they're inside. So that's one of the ways that I think about it.
Great rant. Let's use the last couple of minutes to talk about one last joint project. I know there are a couple of questions here, although I think Dave just took on a few of them.
I was going to say that the athlete thing is a perfect transition.
One of the projects that we both did together, I love the way Dave described it to me recently, was an angel investment like thing, because we provided some philanthropic funding to a documentary called Weight of Gold. And I think my initial linkage to it was from another Coloradan, Jeremy Bloom, who runs Integrate, which we're investors in. And Jeremy's in the movie or in the documentary. It starts around, and sort of the narrator of it is Michael Phelps, talking about his own struggles emotionally and with depression at multiple times actually in his athletic career and after his athletic career. And it goes very deep on about 10, it's about an hour long, it goes very deep on about 10 different Olympic athletes. And
some great ones too, Shaun White, Bodie Miller, Gracie Gold. I mean, these are gold medal winning, like multi-gold medal winning athletes.
So riff on it for, again, we got 4 minutes left. Riff on it for the last couple of minutes about like how powerful is it? And I encourage everybody to watch it. It's on HBO. It's free if you have HBO. Again, 1 hour long. What happens and what's the shift that is the next thing that we can do to amplify this within entrepreneurship, using that as a reflection within sports, because that's having a pretty profound impact on sports right now.
Yeah, it's amazing. That Brad, you put it right. I tell people it's one of my best angel investments of all time. And, I think it's now reached over 1 billion people views, or, it's just really unbelievable how much bigger it went than I think you or I even thought it would. My connection came through Jeremy Bloom as well. I went to Boulder with Jeremy. We were friends in college. I was a ski racer. He was a mogul skier. And anyway, like I said earlier, working on this has given me a profound respect for the fact that many athletes, many of the greatest, people, idols, the people we all looked up to as kids, right, struggle with all these different forms of mental health, and this has become clear not just in sports, but also in music. You've got people like Kanye West and, Selena Gomez, and, huge numbers of musicians talking about their own struggles. You've got people in entrepreneurship, Elon Musk is famously very recently been very open about his own struggles with bipolar, and there's lots of different folks talking about this. And I think that this movie is just a really powerful metaphor and goes really deep into what is applicable across, I think, any genre of creative work where people are doing some of the things we all look up to, and we think that they're really unassailable. For me watching, I knew there were going to be some of these folks involved, but for me watching Shaun White talk about it for some reason was just really powerful. I've always, as a ski racer, also watching Bodie Miller. But Shaun White's won so many gold medals, and he's like just prolific in his winningness, and so just seeing, and he also was one of those guys with an ego so big that it seemed like impenetrable, right? And so to watch him talk about this in the way that he does, and to realize that that's like been such a big part of his journey, I think is profound. And the only other thing that I'll say is that I also spent about 8 years on the board of the U.S. ski team. And one of the things that I really noticed was this, that after the gold medal, or maybe they didn't win the gold medal, they got close and got injured or whatever. I noticed something about athletes, and I've noticed this too about entrepreneurs. The people who are focused on winning the medal or making the money, and that was the only reason that they were doing the difficult, in between part, generally hit the wall afterwards. And the people who loved the practice, loved being in the gym, they just loved being just being an athlete, and winning the gold was just another day. It was just, it was a happy accident. Those people usually didn't suffer the same way. And the same goes with entrepreneurs. I think, Brad, you and I have seen this a lot. If it was all about the money, usually you learn really quickly after the sale that, that wasn't actually what you all thought it would be. And so that would be maybe the good thing to end on, at least, is just to think about the reason why you're doing something. If you're doing entrepreneurship just to hit some moment off in the future, you're setting yourself up for a pretty hard fall. And same goes with, athletics and music and all these things. And so if you find great enjoyment in the process of it and being in it every day and treating it as a practice that you're learning from every single day, then I think you'll be a lot happier over the long term if one of those days turns out to be an IPO or not, and so anyway, that's something I think I learned from that as well.
I think that's your mic drop. Dave, thank you. Spectacular conversation. I really appreciate you spending an hour with us and with Denver Startup Week. And I got a couple of new things from this too that are really useful. So hopefully everybody enjoyed it. And thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Colorado means a lot to me and is a big part of who I am. So I'm always happy to be part of the conversation, and just thank you for the opportunity as well.
Oh, Colorado loves you, man. All right. Good weekend, everybody. Dave, see you soon.
See you soon, Brad.